I'm Erica Hollingsworth, and you're listening to the F1 podcast.
What's up, everyone? It is Richie here from the F1 podcast. Happy Monday. And we're recording this after the British Grand Prix, where Lewis Hamilton is back, finally winning his first Grand Prix since I believe it was 2021.
945 days ago.
I'm not fucking leaving.
945 days between wins for Lewis.
It's been 87 years.
Yeah. It's been 84 years.
Do a barrel roll. And I'm here with my lovely co-hosts as always, Andrew, Erica. How are y'all doing? I know Erica and I had some time on vacation. So Andrew, you handled the pod perfectly while we were away. Thank you so much.
I think it was Erica that handled the pod while we were out. She did a great job too.
I like to think it was a team effort.
It was a team effort. See, I do like to think also that the crystal ball prediction was a team effort too.
Oh no, that was all you, baby. That was all you.
I don't know. I had a funny feeling he was gonna pull through this weekend. Hadn't won a race in 56 Grand Prix, and I'm like, this is Lewis's time, right? The stars were aligning, and boom, with some help, though, for sure, and some bad strategy call. But we'll get into that.
We'll get into it.
We'll get into that. But I say the crystal ball was crystal clear this weekend, people. If you want hard-hitting analysis, you come to the F1 podcast where we guess plus 700 W's. Like, it is our day job.
Also, just shout out to Nova Scotia. I think we gained like a couple followers, really like Formula One. So thank you. And I'm giving them a shout out for a great weekend. But let's get into the British Grand Prix, a weekend of weather, strategies, qualifying, unluckiness for some of the drivers. But I think let's just start with the man, the myth, the legend, the GOAT, Sir Lewis Hamilton. He finally did it.
If you were to tell me this even like 3-4 weeks ago, I would have thought you were crazy. So the beginning of this season, I don't think any of us thought it was going to be as exciting, as much of a shakeup as what we've had. We've had 6 different winners from 4 different teams. And if you were to tell me that only one of those 6 winners would be from Red Bull, I'd have thought you were crazy. Very exciting at this stage of the game that we now have 2 Mercedes drivers. Both of them have won a Grand Prix. And we've seen quite the turnaround in the last while, which I didn't expect. And for Lewis to break his own record of this win broke so many records, like his own and otherwise.
9 wins at Silverstone, which is a new F1 record for a driver at a single track. That is also 17 years in 1 month, which is the time between Lewis's first win and now his most recent win at the British Grand Prix. He is now evened. He's got a nice balanced scale, 104 wins, 104 pole positions. And that was also his 150th podium for Mercedes as well.
It was also, I think, the first time a driver has ever won a race when they have passed 300 races.
Correct.
Yeah. So never has there been a driver who's been in the sport this long and still won and continue to win, which just, especially with the shape Mercedes has been in the last couple years, is bonkers to me, quite frankly.
We knew that Red Bull is going to be the team to beat, but all the teams are catching up. And even, we saw some good drives from, Aston Martin this weekend in Haas. I think we'll get into those particular, but it's nice to see some competition. And I think this sport really needed that. And it will drive viewership. And now we got an F1 movie to talk about with Brad Pitt at 60. I don't know how he being a Formula One driver at 60 years old is possible, but hey, if Lewis Hamilton is doing this at 38 and he can drive till 60, why not?
I don't know about you, but can you imagine being some of these drivers? And they had quite expressive reactions where you've just come off a chaotic race weekend. You're full of emotions, and Brad Pitt is just filming a movie scene beside you while you're trying to debrief with the media.
There were 2 people in particular that had the best reactions, one being Fernando Alonso, who had to do like a legit double take and be like, what the F are you doing in the paddock, Ben, right now? And then the other was, I felt so bad for him. We'll get into his race, was Lando Norris just absolutely beating himself up in the media pen. And then right behind him in the background was just Brad Pitt, all jovial with his quote unquote P5 finish. Because I don't know if you've seen this, the Expensify Apex GP team have made a Twitter account, and they literally tweeted out their own statuses for the the race saying that Sonny finished P5 and Joshua finished P6. I couldn't handle how intense that they're deciding to now take this. That's like literally posting fake results on Twitter.
I think not only that, but also like the margin for error for some of these recordings. For those that don't know, yes, there is an F1 movie coming out in 2025. It got released this weekend during the British Grand Prix. And if you remember last year, most of that recording was done on the grid. So having Brad Pitt and whoever, I forget who the second driver is, all these cameras and the Drive to Survive and everything on the grid, especially Silverstone. It's like Silverstone is the pinnacle of F1 for tracks.
And it's 480,000 people in attendance. Like, it's not a rinky-dink little middle of nowhere, not a lot of people around. Like, people camp out for the weekend,
Mhm.
and it's an insane amount of attendance. Like, one of the few tracks where it's so packed that it's the same amount of attendance as last year and didn't increase. So I personally, like, I felt so bad for Lando. The guy didn't have the weekend that he wanted after what looked like a promising pull into P1 earlier in the race. And so you're beating yourself up over it.
Well,
And
he
then
did get off to a hot start. Like I think he did a great job in, P3 to really maintain his position. He did get overtaken by Max at one point, but was able to recuperate the lead. I think it was funny also just out of the gate here how Gasly was out with a 50 place grid penalty, and he still didn't even start P20 because Checo just absolutely bended in qualifying again with the red flag, then having to start in the pit lane, which then put Gasly to P19, but didn't even make it to the grid
the
because of
grid.
a gearbox issue. I'm like, the one component you didn't change is the issue for the race.
I generally thought that was like an error when you guys sent me this, that he got a 50 place grid penalty. I was like, okay, you mistyped something. You probably meant to say 5, but 50? Like, what?
It literally changed every component of the engine and then failed to manage the gearbox, which then was the issue for the race.
I have to laugh at that. It's too funny to me that this is what went down. And I feel like from there, let's just get into it. Like, the
Yeah.
calamity just kind of ensued from that point once it was lights out.
Yeah, once lights out hit, we had, Albon had contact with Alonso there, kind of going into turn 3 on lap 1, which kind of hindered his race a little bit. I think there was two pivotal moments. So there were two instances of rain, which led to some really poor strategy calls. The first being both Leclerc and Perez calling for inters in like a period where there's only 2 laps of rain and everybody stayed out on their tires, right? Worst case scenario though also was Sauber. I don't know what they were doing with Joe, starting him on soft, only going 10 laps, then having to pit for like mediums, and then having to pit for inters when the rain came, and they didn't even get that right. He finished like miles behind everybody. But the fact that like we had Ferrari and Red Bull make a or like both like a driver from the team just make a poor call for the inners, really just set the race all the way back. Charles was not able to recover, and Perez was not even able to recover whatsoever.
I feel like from there it just kind of spiraled. Like, we saw some exciting action on the track as, cars were shifting position, all that kind of stuff. But
We did
really,
have like 3 overtakes for the lead in like a matter of a lap and a half, which I thought was pretty neat.
when was the last time you ever saw that happen, truthfully? Like 20 years ago?
Like that's why it's so much fun watching nowadays because of how competitive it's really getting. And it was interesting to see because with the damp track, the person who was leading had a tough time trying to navigate where the racing line was based on the dampness of the track. And then the person in the P2 and P3 just studied their line and was like, okay, I'm just gonna overtake you on the straights or wherever they find they find where the dry line is, right? But the problem is once you got into that P1 position, you struggled to then maintain it. So it was really neat around there, like lap 19, lap 20 between Hamilton, Russell, Piastri, and Norris there, which I thought was good fun.
I just still can't get over some of the decisions and like really just how much this has now turned the constructors into like more a competitive battle. I mean, McLaren is now only like all these stupid mistakes. McLaren is only like 7 points behind Ferrari in the constructors championship. And then like Mercedes is slowly creeping up. I mean, It's gonna get interesting throughout the rest of the season if they keep screwing up here.
Like I think there's two pivotal moments during the race for me. It was lap 27/28 when the rain, I think for the second time came, right? And there was an opportunity for McLaren to double stack
Ugh.
and lose 2 to 3 seconds for Piastri, right? Just to then have to wait behind Lando, where you could have held up Lewis, if not even let Lewis overtake him, so that at that point it wouldn't have mattered. It would just battle out of the pits. And McLaren was much faster than Mercedes, I think, was this weekend in those types of conditions, because I think McLaren had like a softer suspension, which allowed them to be able to manage the tire grip or the degradation better, more grip on the track. It wasn't it was taking the corners better, I think, in my opinion, in that case. But just to not double stack and to leave like Piastri out on a really wet track, then at that point, lap 28, he lost 23 seconds as opposed to 3.
He lost an entire pit stop because of that call, basically. To boot, there was the little bit of a mess up where they actually left Lando out too long earlier and should have brought him in as well, just to get him on the inters. The first go about, I believe, which is part of where we started to see things shake up. He went like a lap later than Lewis did, and kind of everything sort of broke out loose from there. So this is kind of where I sit, and a few other people have raised the question too. I can understand maybe at the very beginning of this season, you're not used to being at the front of the grid, but with all of the changes they've made to the team, all the progress they've seen, you can't really blame it on just not being used to being there anymore, because consistently for a while now, especially since Miami, this is a team putting pressure at the front of the grid, and they need to now turn around. Lando needs to get more comfortable off the starting line because he has had some horrific starts the last few weeks, losing position almost immediately before you even get into the first turn. We've also had some questionable strategy calls, I want to say. And I feel really bad because Oscar is someone who I would love to, and I think he has the potential with this car to maybe get his first win this season. But they have to be bang on the money with the calls from here on out, because he has now a couple of times had his race a little bit screwed because of poor calls from the team in terms of, when to come in for a tire change and things like that. So I feel a little weird because I feel like I made similar comments about Ferrari a few years ago, not having their tire strategy on point. And now it's my team that doesn't have their tire strategy on point. But
Well,
we'll see what comes of it.
Zach Brown hired everybody from Ferrari. I think he took the strategists.
We're kind of in this hump. Like, what's going on? And like Carlos and Leclerc are kind of like bickering at each other.
They just fired their head of technical for the chassis and stuff earlier.
He left, and I put that in
Okay.
quotation marks.
He left, but I'm pretty sure I saw a statement some way
He's
that
going
said
down.
that they fired him, something like that. So
Well, no, we're making room for Adrian Newey. That's the plan. This is like the whole master plan.
Do a barrel roll.
Aston Martin. Good weekend, Mr. Cleary.
Take it. I mean, like, they're the 6th fastest car in the grid, and they scored double points because Haas has just unbelievably turned their car into like a semi-rocket ship now, where Hulk has been able just to be a mastermind. And if you were to say that Haas would have, like, I think Hulk has more points in the last 2 races than Perez does in the last 6.
he does. That is a correct stat, I would say. 2 P6 finishes for Nico Hülkenberg.
But just think about that. Perez hasn't even scored more than 16 points in the last 6 races.
And to add insult to injury, Logan Sargent has outqualified him 7 times this season in 12 races.
Oh, God. So there's 2 clauses in Perez's contract technically right now. They say he has to be within 100 points of Max by, I believe it's summer break.
Oh gosh.
And he can't be by more than 5 places out by Max by the summer break. He's currently well beyond 100 points behind Max. He's sitting 5 places behind Max in the Drivers' Championship. So we might see a midseason change. Like, literally, even though we did this extension, we might see a midseason change regardless.
I wouldn't be surprised because I hate to break it to anyone who's not aware. It is now the summer break. Like,
We got 2 more races, I think, in the summer break.
It's technically the halfway point of the season. But yeah, you got Hungary, and then you got Belgium, and then they go on the break.
Yeah, but still, like he has to then like perform at his top level in the next two races, or it's pretty much the writing's on the wall.
And I find it surprising because people were saying Daniel Ricciardo was given not the same about, where he would be in relation to Max, but a lot of flag waving and stuff in order for him to be able to stay with the team. But I'd arguably say that given especially the performance you'd expect from the two cars, Daniel Ricciardo is a more impressive driver right now than Sergio Perez, and he's in the V carb. Like,
Yeah.
if you're looking to get rid of Ricciardo and not Perez, I have major questions for the management team at Red Bull around that decision. It wouldn't make sense to me.
I think you argue though it's time to get rid of both in a way.
If they got rid of both, I'd totally understand. But to get rid of one and not the other when you're looking at getting rid of Daniel and not Perez, to me would be a questionable decision when you have expectations and have seen certain performance from Perez
Yeah.
in the type of car that he's in.
And think about how Liam Lawson feels, like just sitting, patiently waiting to get his opportunity to drive.
He's not going to wait around forever. Like, if
Yeah.
that opportunity doesn't open up soon, he will try to secure a seat with a different team. And I think that that would be, especially with the amount of investment we've seen from Red Bull in him the last few years, a huge loss on them looking forward.
There's two people I feel really bad for based on this weekend. One is George Russell because ironically the guy had a water system issue in like a waterlogged race
Oh,
for him, and he actually was he was driving really spectacularly. But to me, the keys to victory for Hammer this weekend, there's three. One, having his teammate DNF because I think Russell was faster.
Yep.
Two is he made the right calls at the right time with regards to tire strategy, going on inters when he did in the second stint, and then boxing, I think around lap 40, 41, and choosing, unfortunately he chose the better tire of the two. But I think what really stood out for me though was you said this earlier, Erica, and it's very true. McLaren have become now Ferrari when it comes to conversations between engineer and strategy, and conversations particularly between engineer and driver. Because there was a lot of questions asked to Lando during the time where he couldn't come into box, because Lando had he had like a set of mediums new that were going to be the optimal race tire, and Oscar made the call to put himself on the mediums when he went back out after the race. Hamilton and Verstappen had a choice of soft or hard new. Verstappen chose hard, Hamilton chose soft, but I think the best tire would have been medium, but they didn't tell him that it was optimal. They kept asking him what did he want.
yeah.
And then he made the wrong call by going on softs. And I obviously feel bad for Lando, but I think he's beating himself up a little too much at time, because this is when your team has to make a correct decision, not asking what you want. It's like, hey, we see that the mediums are the optimal race tire. We think you should use them, or
Yeah.
you should use them.
How many times do you hear a radio where it's like box for mediums and then the driver will correct them if they feel something else? They are not given the option and having to do that thinking on the fly. It's part of why Charles was so frustrated with Xavi toward the end, because Xavi would always just be like, we are checking and presenting options instead of just telling him what to do or presenting it in a way as like preferred recommendation from the team. I 100% agree with you on that. There's no way a driver will have the same access to information when they're in that car or be able to process the information the same as someone sitting on the pit wall. It shouldn't come down to just the driver in 2024 when we have all this other stuff going on. So I'm hopeful that they pull it all together and figure it out, because right now I'm like, we're missing on some opportunities here, y'all. We could be closing gaps, we could be overtaking other teams, we could be moving up the standings, and we're missing opportunities that we shouldn't be at this stage of it.
So I guess speaking about standings, Lewis 1, Max Verstappen 2, Lando Norris 3, Oscar 4, Carlos Sainz 5, Nico Hulkenberg 6, Lance Stroll 7, Fernando Alonso 8, Alex Albon getting points for Williams at P9, and Yuki Tsunoda at P10. Forgot to also mention that you had 3 British drivers on the top row going into the race for first time in long time. The Lando Norris driver of the day votes did not win for once. So Lewis definitely deserved that. Kind of do like Lewis's and him winning this weekend. Just gets that maybe a little bit more competition between him and George, because George has been out racing him all year. You kind of felt bad for everybody that was camping this weekend with these poor conditions.
Oh my gosh. I I heard there was flooding in some of the fields and stuff, which just adds insult to injury at that point. Like you're already wet and sad, and now you're sitting in the wet and sad and still wet. I don't know. I always hear Silverstone's a great time, though. I feel like for a lot of folks, it wouldn't really matter, but I don't know. I'd prefer to not be sitting in the wet and sad and wet.
Well,
And
we had to
just
deal with this in Montreal, whether it's like
well, we
rain
weren't
jacket.
camping in it.
Oh, I
Like
would not.
that's
Yeah, camping.
different.
Imagine
If
just
I
rolling around at night and you're just sleeping in a puddle of water.
just you hear the squelching, just a
Oh,
under you as you roll over on your little
ugh.
mattress. Oh man.
I
Uh,
think though for me, I want to say that there were two big winners. One, Max Verstappen and Hannah Schmaltz with her strategy calls because it wasn't a Red Bull this weekend, it was a red boat. That thing was so slow compared to the top four teams, in my opinion. He even made a comment too that he said that Carlos was joining the party with Max at the back, and he said, "Oh my God, this is gonna be a bad weekend." So that was like a subtle, funny dig at Ferrari in terms of pace. But like Red Bull were clearly the third fastest car on the grid, and the fact that he was able to finish P2 based on a great strategy call and just optimizing the entire performance out of the car was pretty impressive.
He like got out of this weekend, like it could have been a lot worse. And the fact that he was able to get P2 and still maintain that like significant lead in the constructors too, in the drivers championship as well.
I'm excited to see what comes of it. I think, especially with the summer break coming up, we always see people bring a lot of improvements to a car after that window. And we have some also very exciting tracks coming up in the second half of the season. I don't think we're done with the chaos. I think in my mind, there's still going to be one or two other drivers at least who end up taking a win this season, be it through car development or just, happenstance, because we've seen stuff like that happen before. And I think we're going to get at least one other team in the mix with this whole podium party thing that we've got
Absolutely.
going on. So
My final thoughts, the British GP though. I know this may sound like a bold statement, but of the 104 wins that Lewis Hamilton has won, this is his biggest win of his entire career.
You saw the emotion in it too. When was the last time you've seen him cry? Maybe when he won that
When he
one
won the seventh
championship.
World Drivers' Championship, maybe,
Yeah.
if
no,
that.
Lewis has said that he's never cried after a race win. This was the first time he cried.
And him and Bono being on top of
Oh,
the podium together.
Bono was even like really emotional too. You when the camera panned to him in the in the garage there afterwards, right? You could tell he was just emotional. But to think, right, like people have said Hamilton is, there's the people have said he's washed nowadays, right? He hasn't won since 2021. He's not the same driver that he used to be, right? He's getting older as he passes prime. He basically just took all the haters, shut them up this past weekend with like an arguably incredible race from a driver's perspective. And this kind of like, I honestly think this rejuvenates some of the fan bases back and it's going to only add to F1 viewing because as long as Lewis Hamilton is winning races in F1, people will watch no matter what.
One, the trophy is beautiful at the British Grand Prix. I think that's probably one of my favorite trophies. And two, when I was explaining to someone that Bono was his race engineer, someone's like, wait, Bono from U2 is like helping out Lewis Hamilton. It was a whole kerfuffle, but it was just hilarious trying to explain this.
I just picture it like if someone actually thought it were Bono that was on the other end of the radio. Like, can you imagine Lewis is having a bad moment and just, and I still haven't found what I'm looking for in the background and just be like, shut the fuck up, that's not helping. Like,
Martin Brundle got snubbed by Brian May. Like, what? But apparently, according to his media person, he's like, I don't know a lot about F1 and I don't want to talk. I thought it was it's whatever. I always have an appreciation of Martin in his grid rocks because it is chaos.
oh
And
my
especially
gosh.
especially how more people are now coming onto the grid for these grid walks or whatever you want to call it with these VIP passes. It's carnage probably going through his his
It was
earpiece.
so funny. I don't know if you picked up on it in Austria, but he kind of ended up on the wrong side of like the roped off area ahead of the national anthem. and he was going to walk to talk to someone and was like, nope, I think they'll ban me for life if I go over there, and then tried to double back, but they'd put up the barrier, and he's just like awkwardly stuck beside the barrier with the cameraman as it's all starting. And I was like, oh man, the ability to improvise and roll with the punches, second to none in that, man. I love it. It's great.
I also want to say though, Richie, we were talking about this before. There's a lot of fun junior driver action this weekend, especially in FP1. Hadjar drove Sergio Perez's RB20, and if Sergio's not responsible enough to keep his seat over the next couple of weeks, he might be a full-time driver in that car. Just
We
kidding, I don't
also
know.
saw Jack doing.
You also had Ollie Behrman.
Yeah,
Ollie
driving his
Behrman, yeah.
Franco Colapinto.
Yeah, I didn't
But
I didn't catch practice, but like it was kind of great to see that a lot of the junior drivers getting their chance, especially at Silverstone too.
what I felt that was hard was what I felt bad for them in the sense was that they jumped from FP1 practice and then they gotta go qualify for F2 like right after, pretty much. And the F2 like paddock is where the old pit line, like the pits, like the start stop line is like heading into cops. So they had to get all the way over there in order to then get into the F2 car, different braking system, different engine, all that kind of fun stuff. And it's like, hey, now you gotta go qualify. It's like lots of duty this weekend, and I mean, like, I'd be exhausted. But Silverstone had F3, F2, F1, poor supercar. Like, it was just go, go, go all weekend. A ton of rubber laid down, which ended like just getting washed off anyways. But
Didn't Kim and Antonelli win this weekend?
he did win this weekend. Yeah, Kimi Antonelli finally won an F2 race. Just further cementing why he should be a seat for Mercedes next year. It really is going to come down to it has to come down to where science is going to go. But I think people are starting to get tired of waiting for his decision, because I've heard he's moving now. Like Williams have now shifted their focus away from
Yeah.
him.
Yeah, I heard Alpine he's in the running for suddenly, which I'm like, why would you do that to yourself, quite frankly?
I
Like,
think he's losing positions.
Well, 'cause
and
he's gotta
then
make up his
even
mind.
Ocon's making it sound like he has some options and is negotiating in somewhere. So I don't know if because maybe Red Bull is gonna like pull the plug on a couple of these guys, it's changing the conversations and shifting things up, because we're hearing things that we did not hear for the longest time. Like Ollie Behrman to Haas was pretty well done and dusted like weeks ago. We all kind of knew it was happening. But the rest of it, I'm like, where is this coming from? Like,
Well, a fun rumor I heard on Twitter today, or a thought process was, is Red Bull, you have endless amount of money at your disposal, right? And you could buy out any contract that you want. What if they bought out Hulk's contract at Sauber and brought him in to be the second seat based on the way he's been driving that Haas?
I also heard a rumor that Andrew Clear, you're available to race.
Yeah, I mean, John, I heard you too, Erica as well.
oh yes, I have been really working on my neck strength, which I believe will help me not look like a rag doll in the car. So if you would like to give me the opportunity to look like a rag doll in the car, or perhaps prove you wrong, please sign me to your team seat.
I can only imagine
Please,
myself
thank you.
driving an F1 car, and my head would look like a slingshot going back and forth all the time. Like, oh my gosh.
I just spent the last week with all my cousins with their newborn babies, and it just made me think of, like, when a newborn baby can't hold its own head up, and so you have to support it. Like, that would be what it would were to be if I were in one of these cars.
Well,
And so,
I don't know if it was this year or like last year at Silverstone when they were doing like the media days. Micah Richards, who's like a former footballer with Manchester City,
Yeah.
and he's now like a presenter on the Champions League panel. He's a big dude, right? Strong, buffy guy, right? And he was doing like the neck challenges with Red Bull, where basically you just you lean your side of the body, and all the weight is landing on like your neck on like a seat.
mhm.
And he was just crying the entire time while Max and the Checo were just like, yeah, this is average
That's what we
Sunday
do.
for me. What we do.
Lewis Hamilton winning. Who's going to be the next driver to win? Like,
Well,
I
what if
got
Lewis Hamilton just makes an absolute charge for his eighth WD like World Drivers Championship, because I hear like Mercedes is supposed to start providing like this intensely upgrade. Like they said a comment today that they're going to try and like hyper aggressive upgrade strategy now, where they're going to try make upgrades to when teams aren't doing so. I'm like, okay, love to see how that works out, but imagine.
and you get an upgrade, and you get an upgrade, and you get an upgrade. I'm like, just send it all to Ferrari, please. Thank you. Okay, we'll end this week's episode. As always, Andrew and Erica, so lovely to chat with you, and thank you everyone for supporting us. You can go on our social media channels and our link tree, which has links to all of our channels where you can hear more about us and maybe more crystal ball predictions from Andrew Cleary. Maybe we make that a segment.
I don't know if I want to bet on myself that much, but let's do it.
So much for listening to the F1 podcast. Tune into next week where we're going to preview the Hungarian Grand Prix and lots to happen. So let's end this week's episode like that. Thanks so much, everyone. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Peace.